In 1965, in a wooden hut on the Northland coast of New Zealand, a marine biologist named Bill Ballantine invited a group of commercial fishermen to sit down over a cup of tea. He told them he wanted to close a small stretch of coast at Goat Island to all fishing. Not restricted fishing, not seasonal fishing, all fishing. Half the men in the room said fine. The other half told him, only half joking, that they would kill him. They meant it enough that Ballantine remembered the exact wording for the rest of his life. And they meant a specific place. Roughly 5 square kilometers of shallow reef centered on a small gray island rising out of the sea, 40 minutes north of Auckland. What Ballantine was asking for did not exist anywhere in the world. No country had ever set aside a stretch of coast where nothing at all could be caught or removed. No line fishing, no spear fishing, no hooking a crayfish out of its lair. No prying rock oysters off the shore. To the fishermen in the lab that afternoon, it was theft. To Ballantine, it was the only version of the idea worth fighting for. And it would take him 12 years, a national law change, and a personal visit from the country's attorney general to get it. To understand why Ballantine refused to compromise, one has to know what the seafloor of Goat Island Bay actually looked like in 1965. From the surface, it looked like an ordinary bay. From underwater, it was almost dead. Divers from the marine laboratory swam out over reefs that should have been thick with brown kelp forests. Instead, they found bare gray rock, scoured clean, packed side by side with spiny black sea urchins. The urchins had a Maori name, Kina. In a healthy reef system, Kina lived at low densities, kept in check by the 2 big reef predators, snapper and spiny rock lobster. But snapper and lobster had been fished down for decades. With their predators gone, the Kina had multiplied unchecked. What the urchins left behind, the scientists called an urchin barren. The fishermen who came to the bay called it a normal reef because they had never seen it any other way. That was the piece Ballantine could not stop thinking about. The people arguing with him assumed he wanted to take fish away from fishermen. He did not. He wanted to find out what the bay looked like when nobody took anything at all. Not for a season, not for a year, permanently. His argument was almost embarrassingly simple. There were thousands of places on the New Zealand coast where fishing was allowed and 0 places where it was not. Marine science had never seen a control. Every fishery study anywhere in the world was measuring the difference between heavy fishing and slightly less heavy fishing. Nobody had ever measured the difference between fishing and no fishing at all. Getting that control took 12 years. The idea had first been floated in 1965 by Val Chapman, a botanist at the University of Auckland, who had realized the marine laboratory would be useless if the reef around it kept being scraped flat. Ballantine picked it up and did not put it down. He wrote letters. He gave talks to underwater clubs and diving federations. He argued in front of local councils. New Zealand had no marine reserve law at all in 1965, and no framework to make one. Parliament finally passed the Marine Reserves Act in 1971, 6 years after the first proposal. Ballantine's application for the reserve was then rejected. He applied again. It sat in government offices for another 4 years. Late in the process, the country's attorney general drove up to Lee personally and spent 6 hours in Ballantine's kitchen trying to talk him out of the no-take clause. Any small compromise, the attorney general suggested, and the reserve would go through immediately. A little rod fishing, a little crayfishing, just enough to keep the local community on side. Ballantine refused. When the attorney general left, Ballantine walked up the hill to see the farmer who owned the land the marine laboratory stood on and asked whether he still had his support. The farmer told him to stop worrying and get on with it. In late 1975, the government gazetted the reserve. It was officially opened on the 26th of October 1977, 12 years after the first proposal. The local paper reacted with a single sentence that summed up how most of Lee felt about the whole thing. "Nothing to do at Goat Island Bay anymore," it wrote. The implication, as Ballantine dryly remembered it, was that no red-blooded New Zealander would ever bother visiting a beach where they were not allowed to kill something. The reserve covered 500 hectares of shallow coast. On paper, it now belonged to nothing but the fish, and for the first few years, from the surface, it looked identical to every other bay along that coast. That was the second surprise of the story, and it was Ballantine's colleagues, not the fishermen, who were the most disturbed by it. Nothing dramatic happened in the first years. Divers went out and counted the same reefs and found the same urchins. The Kina barrens sat there. The kelp did not come back underwater. The bay looked almost exactly as it had before the reserve was created. The change began where nobody was looking. It began with the fish that used to get caught. With line fishing banned, snapper stopped being pulled out of the bay. The few that were left grew, and they grew big, the way snapper grow when nothing catches them, up to a meter long. Rock lobster did the same. Their population climbed slowly, then not slowly at all. And once the numbers of snapper and lobster inside the reserve passed a certain threshold, they started doing what they had evolved to do. They ate sea urchins. Snapper crushed young china with their heavy back teeth. Lobsters pulled adult china out from between rocks and cracked them open. The urchin barren began to shrink from the edges inward. In the cleared patches of rock, the seaweed grew back. It took nearly 30 years for the kelp forests of Goat Island Bay to fully return. But once they did, the bay was almost unrecognizable. Fine, feathery brown algae waved in the current. Juvenile fish had somewhere to hide. Species that had not been recorded on those reefs in living memory began to appear on dive surveys. By 2003, when Dr. Tony Willis and Dr. Russell Babcock at the University of Auckland ran a full-baited underwater video survey inside and outside the reserve, the difference in snapper alone was staggering. Legal-sized snapper were 27.7 times more abundant inside the marine reserve than in adjacent fished waters. Seaweed productivity between 1978 and 1996 had climbed by 58%. Rock lobster density inside the reserve was 4 to 5 times higher than outside, and crucially, none of that recovery had cost the government anything except signage. The mechanism was a single word on a piece of paper: no. That is the sentence Ballantine had refused to give up for 12 years. A whole coastal ecosystem had rebuilt itself using nothing but time and the absence of a single human activity. Governments around the world spend billions of dollars on fish stock restoration through hatcheries, catch quotas, size limits, and enforcement patrols. Goat Island had spent almost none of that. The bay had simply been left alone. The next surprise came from the very group of people who had threatened to kill him in 1965. Recreational and commercial fishermen began deliberately fishing right up against the reserve boundary. Marker buoys appeared in a ring around the edge, like Winrandrade holding lobster pots exactly at the limit of the protected zone. The reserve had begun producing so many fish that its excess was spilling into the surrounding waters, and the fishermen were catching that spillover at the fence line. The men who had opposed him for 12 years were now doing their best day of fishing, along the border of the very reserve they had wanted stopped. Ballantine, when asked about it later, said only that this was exactly what he had predicted. He would put it more sharply in interviews across the following decades. Virtually none of the predictions the reserve's opponents had made in 1977 turned out to be true. The village of Lee had not died. Fishermen had not been ruined. What had happened instead was that more than 300,000 people a year now traveled to Goat Island Bay, not to fish, but to look at fish. The reserve had become one of the most popular dive sites in New Zealand. The bigger consequence took longer to arrive. The Marine Reserves Act 1971, the law Ballantine had spent 6 years pushing Parliament to pass, has since been used to create 43 more no-take marine reserves across New Zealand. Cape Rodney to Okakari Point was the first. It is now one of 44. The same model has been copied in Australia, in California, in the Philippines, in South Africa, in the Mediterranean, and in the Kermadec Ocean. Sanctuary north of New Zealand's own coast. Professor Simon Thrush, director of the University of Auckland's Institute of Marine Science, has said the modern concept of the no-take marine reserve essentially began at Goat Island. And every one of those reserves anywhere on the planet carries some of Ballantine's fingerprints on it. There is a harder truth underneath all of this that Ballantine talked about often. Even after 50 years of protection, fish stocks inside Goat Island Bay remain below the levels they would have reached before commercial fishing arrived on this coast. Professor Conrad Pildich, also of the University of Auckland, has pointed out that the reserve has done extraordinary things, but it is still recovering from a baseline that almost nobody alive today has ever seen. That is why Ballantine kept campaigning until the year he died. One reserve, he argued, was never enough. The scale of what humans had removed from the sea was too big for 500 hectares to fix on their own. He wanted networks of no-take reserves big enough to protect entire life cycles and migration routes, up and down every coast in every country. He did not want a museum piece. He wanted a working model. In one of his last interviews, at the age of 78, Ballantine told a reporter that the fundamental purpose of protecting the sea was not to grow more fish for fishermen. It was to let the ocean function as itself for its own sake. Human benefits, he said, would follow. They always did. But they were not the point. He died a few weeks after saying that in November 2015, in the same house on the hill above Lee, where he had lived for more than 50 years. From his kitchen window, you could see the water he had refused to give up on. There is a photograph taken by the writer Kennedy Warren on the rocky shore at Goat Island Bay of Bill Ballantine crouched at the tide line, holding an old slide up to the light. The slide is of the exact same rock, taken decades earlier. He is comparing what is in front of him now to what was there before. He is counting mollusks on a single square meter of stone. Behind him, the sea is doing something he never expected to see in his lifetime. Snapper the length of a forearm hang in clear water a few meters from the beach in a bay where 50 years ago they had almost disappeared. He does not turn around to look at them. He already knows they are there. He is checking the shore for the small things, one at a time, the way he had done every year of his adult life. If this story surprised you, subscribe. Like the video if it was worth your time.